In 1929, the Great Depression reached across the Pacific and hit a small Japanese electronics maker hard. Warehouses overflowed with unsold stock. Sales collapsed almost overnight. Production lines that had been running at full tilt slowed to a crawl. And the company's board of directors, certain there was only one responsible answer, walked into the sick room of their bedridden, ailing founder to deliver it. Cut production in half, and cut half the workforce along with it. By every textbook of the era, that was simply what a responsible company did in a depression. He said no. Not one employee would be let go. Instead, he cut the factory's hours to half days, kept everyone's full daily pay exactly as it was, and asked every single worker to give up their holidays and spend that freed up time helping sell what was piling up in the warehouse. 2 months later, the stockpile was gone and the crisis had passed. This is the story of the man behind that decision, the philosophy that made it look obvious to him when it looked reckless to everyone else, and the reason the company he built still circulates his own words internally decades after his death as a working guide to how its employees should think.
The man was Konosuke Matsushita, and by 1929, he had already built his small electrical equipment company from almost nothing. He was born in Wakayama Prefecture in 1894 into a family whose fortunes collapsed while he was still a child. With the household in financial ruin, he left school early and was sent to Osaka as a young apprentice, first at a shop that sold charcoal braziers, the kind of unglamorous, hands-on trade work that offered no obvious path to founding one of Japan's largest companies. He had no formal business education, no engineering degree, no family wealth to fall back on if things went wrong, and no obvious advantages of any kind. What he built instead, slowly, over decades, starting from a small workshop, was a company that would eventually grow into Panasonic, one of the largest electronics makers on Earth. But the part of his legacy that outlasted the products themselves was a set of ideas about how a business should treat the people inside it. Ideas so distinctive that Japan would later come to call him, half jokingly and half seriously, the god of management.
Here is what actually happened inside that sick room conversation. Matsushita's executives arrived with what looked, on paper, like the only responsible option left: have production, have the workforce, and survive the downturn the way every business textbook of the time said a company should. Matsushita's answer inverted the entire premise they had walked in with. Production could be cut in half, fine, but not a single worker would lose their job. Factory hours would be cut to half days, but full daily wages would still be paid in full with no reduction at all. And in exchange, he asked every employee at the company to give up their holidays and to put that time into selling the backlog sitting unsold in the warehouse. It was not framed as an act of charity. It was closer to a wager that people who felt protected rather than threatened would fight harder to save the company than people who were simply afraid of losing their jobs. Word of the decision spread through the workforce, and by every account, it landed the way he'd hoped. Employees who expected layoff notices instead found their jobs and their pay intact, and they poured that same energy into clearing the warehouse. The wager paid off startlingly fast. Within 2 months, the entire stockpile was sold, and the crisis that had brought his executives to his sick room in the first place was over. That instinct, protect people first, was not a one-time improvisation born out of a single crisis. 3 years later, in 1932, Matsushita gave it a name and a permanent place in the company's own history. On May 5th of that year, at the Chuo Denki Club in Osaka's Dojima district, at what the company still marks as its first founding anniversary ceremony, he laid out an idea that came to be known as his tap water philosophy. In his own words, repeated and requoted inside Japan ever since. Make good products, cheaply, and in great quantity. The image he reached for was deliberate. Water from a tap is valuable enough that life without it is unthinkable, and yet it is priced so low and so reliably available that nobody thinks twice before turning the handle. That, he argued, is what manufactured goods should be like, useful enough to matter, but cheap enough and abundant enough that ordinary people never have to hesitate before buying one. For a man who had grown up in a household stripped of money, sent out to apprentice as a child because his family could no longer support him, that was not an abstract economic theory. Manufacturing, in his framing, was not simply about turning a profit. It was closer to a public mission, making ordinary life materially easier for as many people as possible. And a mission like that, he believed, required treating the people who made the products with the same seriousness the company gave to the people who bought them.
That philosophy shaped very concrete decisions, not just speeches. Rather than chasing high margins on a small run of premium goods, Matsushita's company built its growth on getting reliable, decently made products into as many households as possible, betting that scale and a trustworthy reputation would compound faster over time than profit taken per unit. On paper, that is not a flashy strategy. It looks almost boring written down as a business plan. Sell more, charge less, repeat. But it is exactly that unglamorous choice that explains why the 1929 decision was even possible in the first place. A company chasing thin margins on a narrow line of premium goods has very little slack to work with when a depression hits. A company that had already built manufacturing scale, broad household reach, and a reservoir of public goodwill by supplying products people actually needed had something to draw on. When the crisis came, it had the ability to fight its way out through effort, rather than by treating its own workforce as the first and easiest thing to cut.
As the company grew larger, Matsushita made another move that was unusual for its era. He broke the company into semi-independent business divisions, each one responsible for its own products, and crucially, its own bottom line. The stated reasoning was not simply administrative tidiness. According to the accounts of his own thinking that have survived him, simply carrying out an assigned task faithfully was never enough in his eyes. He wanted every employee, not just the senior executives at the top, to approach their work with the mindset of a manager, someone who thought about outcomes and consequences, not just instructions handed down from above. Structured this way, a company of thousands of workers stops behaving like a single pyramid handing orders downward, and starts behaving more like a federation of smaller businesses, each one run by someone who has to actually think like an owner. It was, in effect, a deliberate attempt to multiply the number of people inside the company who thought the way the founder himself did, rather than leaving that kind of judgment concentrated in a handful of people at the very top. Underneath all of this was a belief that would have sounded strange coming from most industrialists of his era. In Matsushita's own framing, a company does not, in the deepest sense, belong only to the people running it. A corporation, he argued, is the property of its shareholders, yes, but at the very same time, it functions as a public institution of the society it operates within, a kind of public instrument, obligated to the community around it just as much as it is obligated to the people who own its shares. That belief is arguably the single thread running through everything already described. The 1929 decision to protect jobs rather than cut them, the tap water philosophy's insistence on making life materially easier for ordinary people, and the division system's push to turn every worker into someone who thinks like an owner. If a company is understood as a public trust rather than simply private property, then protecting the people inside it during a crisis is not an act of generosity that a founder happens to choose. Under that framing, it stops being optional charity and becomes something closer to the job itself. After stepping back from the day-to-day running of the company, Matsushita spent his later years formalizing these ideas even further. He founded an institute built around the idea of peace and prosperity, dedicated to researching and spreading exactly this kind of thinking about business and society, and later a separate school built specifically to train the next generation of political leaders. By the time of his death, Japanese business culture had already settled on a nickname for him that stuck for good, Keie no Kami-sama, the god of management. And that nickname did not fade into nostalgia the way most corporate founder legends eventually do. Decades later, Panasonic still circulates his original words internally, actively, as guidance for how its employees should think about their own work, not as a museum piece to be admired, but as an operating philosophy still meant to be used.
Konosuke Matsushita never described the 1929 decision as an act of kindness that simply happened to work out well in the end. In his own account of it, it was the logical output of a specific belief that people who feel secure in their jobs will fight harder for a company than people who feel disposable. Nearly a century later, most companies facing a sudden collapse in demand still reach for the layoff first and treat loyalty to their own workforce as a nice-to-have, considered only after the cutting is done. Matsushita built an entire philosophy and eventually an entire company on doing it in the other order. Protect the people first and let the company's fortunes follow from that. Subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.